Al, thank you so much for giving me the time. It's an honor to interview you.
You're more than welcome.
All right. So yeah. First, I just want to say you're an absolute legend, Hall of Famer. I mean, it's like just pretty much half of the big fights when it weren't on HBO, they were on Showtime. So your voice is tied to a lot of historical fights throughout the years. So it's definitely a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thank you. It's funny. Sometimes I'll, I don't know, fights will pop up for whatever reason, whether on YouTube or somehow, and all of a sudden, I'll hear my voice, and I'll say, "Wow, I did that." I can't, it's like, really, I did that, and so sometimes it's kind of surreal. And you're right. There were, of course, many that I didn't do, but there were a lot of major fights, especially in the '80s, and then even up through the '90s and 2000s that I was able to do. So it was a joy.
Yeah. All right. So I kind of want to get a little bit of a biographical interview with you. So I kind of want to start all the way from the beginning. You're from
Mhm.
Chicago, correct?
I am
Yeah.
indeed.
Tell me what Chicago was like in the 50s and 60s, like a time where you grew up.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. I grew up in the south side of Chicago, and I grew up in an area called Gage Park that was very, back in those days. Chicago was a very neighborhood-oriented city, but it was also a very segregated city, and so uh, and then people tended to gravitate to locations sometimes based on religion, sometimes based on uh, you know uh, many other demographic things that you can imagine. And so I lived in this area that was primarily white and Catholic. Okay, so um, it was it was really an interesting time back then when I grew up because the city was just starting to kind of, the civil rights movement was becoming more, was continuing to be more vocal. The city was starting to change. And so that was one element that of my childhood and moving forward into my teen years that was kind of an overriding story a little bit about all that. However, in general, I mean, I grew up with a single mom. My dad passed away when I was 11, and we lived in a little house in the southwest side of Chicago that my dad got because he was in World War II, and the Army, you know, helped soldiers get, if they could, get into houses. And I had for the most part, a kind of interesting and good childhood.